Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Wednesday.
Somebody's computer over there's got their sound on.
Are we sure? Yes. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Wednesday, June 28th. Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge our gathering in the traditional territory of the Cowichan people. And before us, we have an agenda. I turn to Ms. Boyd. What do we have around agenda adoption today?
Thank you, Chair. We have a motion to approve the agenda as amended with adding a closed session new business item.
The information is before you, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. And we have the adoption of the minutes, Committee of the Whole meeting of June 14th, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of June 14th, correction there, be adopted.
Good catch. Any discussion? Move the minutes of the June 14th meeting. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next item, number 3.
Thank you. Business arising from minutes, there are none. We have public input period. This is a total of 15 minutes and a 3-minute maximum.
Like to encourage anyone that would like to provide input to the committee on items on our agenda today.
Hello, Sheila Bell Irving, Shawnigan Lake resident, family property of 82 years, and property taxes of $11,716, and going up apparently. I'd like to speak about R2, number 4, 5, and 6, which is the borrowing of $1,117,000 to take over Pan Disposal. Seems a bit extreme, if not illegal, and you're kind of circumventing the process.
Excuse me, Ms. Bell Irving.
I'm putting the cart before the horse.
When you're addressing us, this is our precinct of where we expect people to not be hurling allegations of illegalities and the likes. I'd like you to please refrain from the more aggressive language that you're using.
Mm-hmm. So isn't this a circumvented process since you actually haven't voted on the motion to be borrowing the money first? It's kind of putting the cart before the horse.
Ms. Bell Irving, there's no circumvented process here. That's very almost litigious in nature. If you have some points to make to provide us input in our deliberations, that's appreciated.
Okay. So you're going to be taking over a local company to run it yourself and charge community $300 a year to use this. It's putting more financial strain on the people in our community. We already have the highest taxes in the Cowichan Valley, and we're really struggling. Like, seriously, this should not be happening. People are quite happy with Pan Disposal. And
Ms. Bell Irving, we're going to be discussing the purchase of trucks. We're not discussing the service in this meeting. That will be happening this afternoon.
Wouldn't that be the same thing?
No.
Really?
We're discussing the purchase of trucks. So I'm going to suggest that you please provide us input on items that are on the agenda pertinent to today when you know that there will be discussion later on this afternoon about this item.
Fine. Then I will just say I object to borrowing $1,117,000. Thank you.
Like to invite anyone else that would like to provide input on items on our agenda today? Seeing none, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you. We have no delegations, correspondence, information. We'll move right to 8 reports. R1, report from the Economic Development, Cowichan Re-Cannabis in the Cowichan Valley Report.
Mr. O'Riordan, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide some information on the cannabis in the Cowichan Valley Report, which was produced by Craft Cannabis BC in collaboration with economic development staff. So the report analyzes some primary research undertaken in the fall of 2021, along with secondary research to provide some context and comparison for local information. So this secondary research resulted in 11 recommendations that you'll see in the report that were been endorsed by EDC staff and Craft Cannabis BC for the nurturing and maturation of the local cannabis industry in Cowichan, including some proposed actions around sector development, potential local government policy and advocacy. So I just want to acknowledge that my colleague Brittany Taylor, who's on vacation, did quite a bit of work in this report, along with Sarah Campbell from Craft Cannabis BC, who's here today. So I just want to acknowledge the work that was undertaken. And so the report will be accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation from Craft Cannabis BC by Sarah Campbell. So I'm going to hand you over to her for a presentation now.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I don't know if I need to be up there. Okay, just a little bit. Thanks.
So just a tip, pull it towards you so we can keep your smiling face in the screen while
Okay.
you're speaking.
Perfect.
Perfect, thank you.
And then as far as the slide switching goes, do I just go? Or I can, okay, sweet. So thank you for having me. My name is Sarah Campbell. I'm a financial administrator at Vancouver Island University, part-time, and I am a director of the Craft Cannabis Association of BC. We're a nonprofit industry association formed in 2016 to support small-scale producers. We partnered with ECDEV Cowichan in 2021 to provide a survey of the cannabis businesses within the Cowichan Valley. We also consulted with MNP they helped us formulate the questions to ensure that we were gathering the best data. And I'm going to flip through the beginning section of these slides because I like to get to the summary of the results in particular. Maybe to the right? Okay, there we go. All right, so the purpose of the study was to gather a snapshot of the industry 3 years after legalization. Cannabis was legalized in October of 2018. What we wanted to do is understand the socioeconomic impacts of the transition to the legal industry and gather baseline data that we could use to measure the health of the industry moving forward. So the legal cannabis industry is in its infancy. There were 3 goals of legalization, 3 main goals. Of course, protecting health and safety, and the third that hasn't been a focus really as of yet is that it is intended to generate economic growth. In fact, Justin Trudeau in March of this year acknowledged that. He was on the East Coast and he said that given the focus has been on health and safety and that ball is rolling, that it might be time to actually look at the economic development opportunities here. These are stats from 2021. I think that the number of dollars in sales has grown since then. I wish I had updated stats for you, but you'll see me again at some point and I'll let you know. But you can see that the industry already provides thousands of jobs, and in particular, the $2 billion to local economies is for BC in particular as of 2021. As well, I've just highlighted that cannabis was responsible for 9% of the total farm cash receipts in BC in 2020, and now, as of 2022, it's 14%. I don't think I need to tell most of you that the CVRD, this region in particular, is important in regards to the cannabis industry. There's a few others in the province, but the Cowichan Valley has a great history of cannabis production. There's a ton of experience here, and if we are looking at economic opportunities, there's opportunity here for supported industry. So very quickly, we developed the survey with both Economic Development Cowichan and MNP. It was conducted in November of 2021. It took a while to analyze the data. I'm happy to present it to you today. And just briefly, as of 2021, there were 27 licensed businesses. That includes producers, retailers, and 1 laboratory here in the CVRD. 20 of those appeared to be in business, and those were the folks that we approached and asked them to complete the survey. We had a very good response from producers in particular, 75% response rate. Overall, 55%. Some of the retailers were a little hesitant, said they might participate next time, I think because they're hoping to proceed through, work with you folks. And so we'll see what happens when we conduct the survey again, hopefully. So we generally tried to gather data related to the socioeconomic health of the industry. And as well, we included a couple questions around two particular provincial programs that have recently been rolled out. That's Farmgate, direct delivery was another, and home delivery for retailers. So I thought I'd include this first. This was our number one question. So you can see here, this includes the 27 operators as of November 2021. It should be mentioned that where you see the line in Duncan, these numbers were provided to us by the Ministry of Agriculture, and they weren't able to be specific. And so we're feeling that the number of producers, for example, that are noted in Duncan are likely in the surrounding areas, and that's something we can get at a little further down the road. But I thought you might be interested just to see who's in your region. So in general, here's the results. Summary of the results. In general, the number of producers and retailers is on par with similar regions like the Kootenays and the Okanagan. We do have a distinct advantage when it comes to experience. 60% of operators right now have had at least 10 years of experience in the industry, and 30% have 20 plus years in the industry. These folks are operating at the moment, and they're doing well enough compared to the rest of the folks across the province. And I do think this is something we want to nurture into the future and not lose these folks that have the history, the stories, again, the experience that we can bring forward to have a really robust industry here. So the present and future economic impact is basically, they're mostly small businesses, what the CVRD considers small businesses, up to maybe 4 employees. These small businesses provide hundreds of full-time jobs at the moment, over 100 part-time jobs, and many seasonal and temporary jobs. And that's just the folks that we actually surveyed. So there's still a number of folks and many more jobs that we can consider they bring forward. It definitely, in the Valley, the cannabis industry supports a diverse workforce. And this is not usual in BC and across the country. Women in particular are very well represented in director positions and as owners. And I think that this is really interesting and something that might be worth looking at. Why in this region is that the case? As well, generally, cannabis businesses provide living wage jobs, better than living wage jobs. Producers in particular provide better than the 1925 or whatever the current number is within the CVRD, and retailers are just under, and they've said that they would like to pay their people more as soon as they're able to have some revenue. Continuing with the results, existing businesses are struggling. We asked questions around the annual revenue, net profit, profit margins, operating expenses. So just focusing on net profit, only 1 producer and 1 lab at the time were actually making a profit. Less than half were breaking even, and the majority were in the red. And they predicted that by December 2022, that situation would change. I think maybe for some that was true, for many it was not. So it really, I think, is maybe time to conduct a similar survey and just see where they're at. I know folks were hopeful that things would turn around, and it hasn't really gone that way so far. So it'd be interesting to see where people are at today. So from these results, we narrowed in on a couple of sector development opportunities. I think one of the greatest is forming a cannabis working group here in the CVRD. That would include staff from the CVRD Economic Development, cannabis businesses, couch and tourism, wine and ag industries, and government, amongst just a few. We definitely would like to repeat the survey again every 3 to 5 years, just to identify trends, opportunities, and challenges. I think we should engage with the legacy market at some point and just find out the numbers there, whether people intend to transition or not, or if there's any point in trying to help them do that. And find out what they're doing now. If they're not transitioning, maybe they're available for other types of work that we could help with training perhaps, or I think there's a real big pool of people there that we would like to find work for. I think encouraging networking between cannabis businesses and wine and tourism, just to inform the development of a complementary cannabis tourism industry and branding. And we definitely want to work with local credit unions and Community Futures Cowichan to support financing options. Financing is one of the most difficult areas right now for cannabis businesses. So a few specific local government considerations. You'll see in the report, we kind of outlined how government policy has changed over the years. We really think that the production restrictions could be relaxed a little bit. I understand that you've taken a very precautionary approach, and there has been movement. We acknowledge that in the report. But I think there's even more, especially around opening up perhaps farm gate for production sites that are outside the ALR. You'll see that there are a few sites in the ALR, a few that are not. They're doing this in Victoria. There's quite a lot happening right now in regards to farm gate, and consumption is coming. And so I think this is the time for folks to be engaged in the policy development across the province as well as locally, just to ensure that the right policies are in place to help us moving forward. We also, I think it's really important that you monitor the number of retail licenses. I think we're healthy now, and we do provide some comparisons and sort of the ideal number of retailers per population. There's lots of debate. We work very closely with the Retail Association of BC, the Cannabis Retail Association of BC. And there's different feelings amongst different jurisdictions, but I think you're doing a great job of just monitoring the retail license and continue to do that, and supporting independent private businesses rather than BC cannabis stores is a fantastic and appreciated approach. And advocacy. So there's a couple things I think that local government can help us with. One is lobbying the government for a particular designation, whether it be a BC craft cannabis designation or just a BC cannabis designation, something similar to Buy BC, to help consumers identify BC grown products. There's very little that we're able to do in regards to promotion of cannabis, but we know that consumers do, especially in BC, care about where their cannabis comes from. So if there's a way for us to do that, and we are actively working on these things, so it's just we're asking for support. We also would love for some lobbying to happen with the provincial government to allow independent retailers to use online sales and third-party delivery services. The liquor distribution branch, the BC cannabis stores are allowed to do that. Private retailers are not. And so we're just asking for a fair playing field here. We also queried the local businesses just to find out how local government could support them. So I'll just give you a second maybe to read some of these things, but of course, the industry is hoping that we and you see the value of the industry and consider it an opportunity, very much like the wine industry and tourism here. Give you one more second. I might just leave it there because the next section is just questions.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. I will turn to committee. I've got Director Wilson and then followed by Justice. Oh, hang on. Go ahead.
Close up here. Thank you very much for that. And, you know, I fully appreciate that there are health benefits to cannabis. In fact, this old shoulder of mine thanks you very much for that stuff that goes on there. But one of the things I have some problems with is the possible loss of ALR land in food production.
Yes.
And we've been told over and over again that we need to increase our self-sufficiency here.
Yep.
And from what I hear, there is far more profitability in growing cannabis as there is, let's say, growing cauliflower. neighbors. So there's my first problem there, that loss of ALR land, a possible loss. And I kind of, the statement that's made in there, cannabis is agriculture. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think that was
Stretching it a little bit there, I think maybe. But there you go. And then to relax the restrictions on AR land as well as cannabis sales at production sites outside of the ALR. That's where I have another problem there, and that's because we have had one very local to us, and it caused a lot of residential problems. And that's the kind of thing. So how would, I will get to a question, I promise. How would we make sure that there's no residential impact through odor, through noise, whatever it is, because it can be pretty pungent, this stuff. How would the industry police this? Because we can't rely fully on our bylaw people whose resources are stretched already. Is there anything internally that you might be bringing up on that kind of thing?
Well, I think this is where we're talking about the cannabis working group in particular that would involve local government, industry, government folks, as well as research. So now that I'm at VIU, I just see the opportunities for there to be a ton of research in this area, community partnerships, and basing our decisions and your decisions on actual facts. And I think carefully, like moving forward carefully. And that's what we have been doing. I think that we're not saying open it up, let's allow it wherever it needs to be allowed, but let's look at where it might be okay. And I think that's probably the next stage, actually, is to look at the land use as it exists, really focusing on production and where it might be opened up. We're not saying we know exactly where that is today, but just doing it in a responsible way, because we know we don't want to have neighbors who are, against the industry and very vocal about it. This has sort of been the case with the history of medical cannabis. And so we're, as an industry, we're trying to be good neighbors. And that's
great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I also,
go
food
ahead.
security. The only thing about food security is, we've got some folks in the industry who've given presentations around what it costs to produce lettuce, for example. It's almost on par today with like other produce. Like the cost of cannabis, the price of cannabis is being driven through the floor for a lot of reasons we can get into another time, but it is not an immensely profitable crop today. And I would love to come and present those numbers to you if you're interested at some point. But I think what we really want to do is we want to encourage people to be able to diversify on their land. And so the goal from many years ago was to allow cannabis to be grown with fruit and vegetables. We can't today. Insurance companies will not allow both of those products. They won't cover a farm that grows both of those products. So there's real big hurdles before we can actually ever get to the point where cannabis is maybe helping people stay on the land, have a income that supports growing food. Like, I think there's some synergies there rather than it actually taking away.
And there's a lot of pressure because of the amount of forage crops to feed animals in the valley, and I think the number is pretty outrageous. I think there's still a lot of room there.
Yeah.
I just want to be sure I've got Directors Justice, McGonigal, Manhassan, Martman, and Director Deck. Please go ahead, Director Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions which I can ask together or separately, but I'll start with the first one anyway. Thank you for the report. The report notes that there's many legacy operators in the Cowichan Valley, and also notes that there's many award-winning breeders, growers, and processors.
Yep.
What I wasn't clear about was whether those are predominantly in the so-called legacy market or they've transitioned to the legal market, and how important is it as an economic development opportunity to manage that transition or encourage that transition into the legal market? Or is the legacy market, just as significant for the local economy as the legal market?
Yeah. There's two sides to that coin, but I think ultimately, given that we have legalized cannabis nationwide, and that is the direction we're going in, it has pros and cons. Cannabis has supported this community for a number of decades. And so there was real fear that when legalization happened, that people would either not be able to participate at all or that they might not be interested. And we're kind of in that boat right now. I would say I don't have numbers exactly, but the operators that we spoke to, most of them are legacy operators in the legal market today. The legacy folks that I know that are not in the legal market are generally people who are single moms, made extra money to take a trip, retired folks that were making extra money to pay their bills. And so there isn't room. The investments are so huge that are necessary for a legal cannabis business at this point that the folks that are just sort of like were in the industry and using it to support their lifestyle are not really able to transition at this point. The Kootenays did a project where they helped transition or tried to transition about 50 legacy operators into the legal market. And I think 12 overall actually made it. And they're very concerned about what their local economy is going to look like if these folks cannot participate. I don't think every legal operator needs to own a business. I think that there's opportunity for them to be working at a legal cannabis production or legal cannabis business site, but it's just educating and providing the opportunities, and rather than it being totally underground and officially recognized over the last number of decades, to have it be something that is out in the open and to give people an opportunity to find out what their options are. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but.
No, thanks, that's very helpful.
Your
Mr.
your
Chair,
second
may I-
question?
Thank you. So, I believe it's legal, and I believe some people like to grow their own
Yep.
cannabis, but they only have the option currently of buying and trying to raise plants from seed. So where are we with respect to allowing licensed cannabis producers, or perhaps even just normal old plant nurseries, to sell cannabis seedlings to the public? I mean, I think that's maybe a provincial regulation. And
It is.
Some provinces allow it. I don't know.
It is allowed here. It all has to go through the centralized distribution center, which is fine, except that it's a little complicated. And I think that we're still in early days. So if you're a retailer, and you could be, with Farmgate, if you're a producer on ALR land, you're getting a production retail site license. So it's essentially a retail license at your farm. They will be allowed to sell seedlings and clones at some point. I think retailers are really wondering why they would want to do that when you have a space that has glass cases and objects that are not going to need water and light and all these things, right? A plant needs to have food and light. And so it's a whole separate infrastructure that they would actually need to have on hand. The provincial government has been very supportive of small-scale producers. They introduced a direct delivery model that actually does allow producers, particularly processors, to ship products to the retailers without going through the centralized distribution center. But, so I think that there are opportunities there for there to be pre-orders, perhaps, and then have the clones and clones shipped directly to retailers when orders are they're expected to pick up right away rather than sitting on site. But that's basically the challenge, is that the retailers built their stores, clones were not available for sale at that point, and now that's going to be an option maybe moving forward, and just some are going to choose to do it, some aren't, and there might be yet another avenue to do it effectively.
Okay, thank you. So we're not anytime soon going to go out to Dinters and buy our...
No. No.
Thank you.
No, there's definitely many smaller stages that need to occur before that. And the government, like I said, Farmgate policy is being reviewed now. That is one area they're really hoping to support small-scale producers, connect with consumers on their farm, which is the whole intention of Farmgate, right? To really bring consumers awareness to what farms and agriculture actually are. And so that's their focus, and it's a very small piece. So it's going to be many, probably years before you're able to buy at Dinters.
Thank you for that. I just want to remind directors to make sure your microphones are relatively near your face when you speak. I won't have to remind Director McGonigal of that. And keep in mind as well, a gentle reminder that we're working towards a recommended resolution on page 2 of our agenda at some point relatively soon, I hope. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, and It's interesting, I've been here a long time, and when I was first elected, you couldn't even suggest that you were a consumer of cannabis. It was frowned upon. Now I can legally enter Jerry's Cannabis Store in Lake Cowichan for pain relief, gummies to help me sleep. We've come a long way in the legalization, but I think there is room for an expansion of the possibilities. One of my concerns was in the ALR, but given that there's 9 classes within the ALR formulary, I would suggest that the focus be on class 8 or 9 that are not food growing or food secure opportunities for that option of cannabis production, perhaps in that mode. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think you're speaking up a little bit more than I'm aware of all the land uses within the ALR, but that is something that I hope to focus on over the next little bit, so maybe we can connect.
We have Director Manhouse next.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good to see you again. I was fortunate enough to be invited to a couple of the meetings that were held by your organization, and fortunate enough to be able to speak, to be invited to speak actually at the hub in Cowichan Station at the last meeting. And I spoke about agritourism. I'm glad that agritourism is part of this report, and one of the recommendations that we try to get that accomplished, similar to what the wine tours are. And I think this is a great opportunity for our region, for tourism and to generate economic activity for us. I know the black market is still strong in the area. I think that's why the uptake for retail, legalized retail, is still not at the position or status
50%
should be.
roughly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is due to the regulations and the taxation of cannabis, and also what they can advertise and how they can advertise, even though in the last couple of weeks, some of that has been laxed now. So that's a good move by the provincial government for that. I know the KPU, I was part of the KPU at Kwantlen Polytechnic University that actually started the Budmaster program there. I think that's come along really well, and then most of the classes are sold out. I know a number of people that have taken that class and actually are in the retail business now.
Nice.
On Salt Spring Island and in the Cowichan Valley, which is great. So those are just comments I wanted to make, and keep up the great work. I think it's a good economic generator for the valley.
Thank you.
So keep up the great work.
Thank you. We are meeting with Cross Ministries on Friday. We've been having regular meetings with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Agriculture, Jobs, Trade and Economic Development to further the federal as well as the provincial rules. And we're intending to go to Ottawa with federal counterparts to talk about the big problems.
That wouldn't include revenue sharing with local governments.
Yes, absolutely. That's
Right
something
on.
we always recommended at the UBCM, and we will continue to do so.
Excellent, thank you. Director Martman.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. I'm interested in some of the numbers. You mentioned that $2 billion, I think was 2018 numbers.
2021.
2021 numbers. And when I look at where those numbers came from, they are saying that that's sort of the total of regulated and unregulated economic. When you go to the webpage you put there, it said it came from both regulated and unregulated. And I was just curious, in the Cowichan Valley, do you have a percentage at all about what's regulated, what's not regulated?
No, I think generally what they're saying today, I did look up some numbers yesterday, it's about 50% uptake, legal versus gray market. I think in the Valley, that number we could probably say is at least 50%, maybe even more towards the black market side. So there's lots of room to push those folks into the legal market, and we're doing lots of things behind the scenes to try to do that, and with the restrictions, the immense number of restrictions we have on us. I'm pretty sure the $2 billion is for legal operations.
Okay.
It's really a focus, and maybe I'll double check and make sure that. But that's something we're trying to do, is really not provide the numbers for the black market, except where it's saying, like, we need to tip the scales. We still have a lot of tipping to do. And Yeah.
Follow up?
Thank you. When you mentioned gray market, I just have to think of my parents because
Why?
I grew up in Arrington. I should probably say no more.
Okay.
So the second question is, I think it was mentioned earlier, is about the agricultural land reserve and about agricultural lands. And I only have one experience of a cannabis farm in our area, well, in the RDN. And I don't know if that experience is what is today. So I'm interested in your thoughts about what happens when a farm becomes a cannabis production. What happens, what's required to that farm, and what is required for that farm when it goes to farm gate?
Yep.
Like around security and can you explain a little bit of that?
Yes. It is very difficult to get a license to produce cannabis. That is provided by the federal government. It takes about a year and a half, roughly, maybe a little bit less, to get your license. There's a huge security clearance process. Each person is analyzed, all of their history. Many people are denied licenses based on their past, so you need to be a good operator. We pay thousands of dollars, $5,000 for a security clearance per individual, per production facility. So I guess what I'm saying is you have to provide all your SOPs, your standard operating procedures get reviewed. The CRA, both the CRA and the federal government provide independent reviews of their focused areas. So good production practices are insisted upon. What started with the cannabis industry was all indoor production, right? It was based on like pharmaceutical style cannabis. There was a few big companies across the country that were allowed to do it. The system was built for those types of operations. We lobbied the federal government to allow us to produce cannabis outdoors because that is exactly where it should be produced. If we're talking about sustainability moving into the future, energy-wise, it's an unsustainable industry building or producing indoors. So luckily we were allowed to produce outdoors. Our focus has always been on small-scale cannabis production facilities and sites, and especially here on the island, that is incredibly important. We don't have the land base to allow for larger producers. Tilray in the RDN, they're basically not there anymore. Many of these big companies are dead or dying. So I think the future actually is craft cannabis, small scale, and I appreciate that the board, bylaw 4393, whatever the number is, I think early drafts of this report were viewed by Land Planning Services and now acknowledge the different types of licensing, micro, small scale, versus standard, larger scale. So I think just that kind of ability to sort of take a look at what a smaller operation requires. So we need fencing. Security SOP is a big part of the production license. You need to have fences, and we argued that we'd like them to not be ugly with barbed wire. They just need to keep people out. Cameras are usually provided around the perimeter to ensure that people aren't stealing cannabis, and hopefully that will be the thing of the past. At the beginning, people are thinking free for all, and really there haven't been any cases of people stealing cannabis out of a licensed producer's site. So I think there's enough protection or security in the federal license process. And then Farmgate, so that the province is allowing the feds to provide these licenses, and then they're responsible for the retail side of things. So what they're looking at is liability. That's their main concern at this point. Liability or just concern for people that are visiting the site and consuming, and similar to at a winery. And they're being very careful, and we're having many meetings with them around how we would do that responsibly. And we'll continue to do that and just make sure that it's something that is done in a responsible manner. Yeah.
Maybe just to add to the conversation around agricultural production and craft cannabis in particular, given went on a tour at Sea Dog Farm a few years ago, and their experience was, yes, lots of form filling, lots of patience required. So if you're good at filling forms, you can get there. And that their concept was that cannabis, craft cannabis in particular, given the small amount of square footage that you can only undertake with it, can be an opportunity to support farm viability. So it's a small square footage. They can exist in tandem, but it does require a lot of, process and paperwork. But they did it without consultants. They did it by themselves, and were able to meet the minimum requirements of you need a sorting facility. Well, they were like, okay, I've got a table over here, and I have write down sorting facility next to this, and a pair of gloves. Do I meet the requirements? And so it is possible. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Have you reached out to the farming community and asked them their opinion on what this is about? Thanks.
Yeah, so I've presented at the Island Ag Show, also the Pacific Ag Show in Abbotsford. We work very closely with the Ministry of Agriculture, and I intend to continue our engagement with the local farming community. We got a government grant, 2 government grants, to educate folks on regenerative cannabis production. And we invited as many of the local agricultural producers as we could, because I think there's knowledge on the cannabis side that can be shared with local producers here. Regenerative farming in general is, again, a way of the future, and so that was one way for us to bridge that gap. And my boss at VIU is actually a farming expert. She's a local farmer in Chemainus. She's a Canada-wide, world-renowned researcher, and her background is in farming and farm diversification. So I'm building this community of folks around me who can help us do the right thing and bridge the gap and get their opinions. And I think there's lots of ways to do that. We've got some water concerns in my region right now, and so going to those types of events and having these conversations, it takes a long time, but we just keep at it and address concerns where they arise and trying our best.
Director Deck to close.
Thank you for your presentation, and you just brought up exactly what I was going to ask you, and that's water use.
Yep.
And water sustainability, given that that's becoming more and more
Absolutely.
an issue as time goes on. So I'm wondering where that sits on your priorities.
Yes, so we've worked again with the Ministry of Agriculture, and we look to like California and other jurisdictions where they have legalized cannabis earlier than us, where they do a lot of outdoor cannabis. What problems are they seeing down there? What are they doing to mitigate those problems? I think regenerative cannabis production is a way forward, and small scale. Again, we don't need to have huge, enormous fields that require a ton of irrigation, and then just being really smart about how you build your soil and how you water it effectively. I think all agricultural industries are going to have to look at this moving forward. And again, there's not that many farms at the moment. I don't think there will be into the near future, so I think we have time, and the water emergency is happening right now. So they're trying to fit us, the Ministry of Agriculture is trying to get an idea of cannabis needs for water and comparing it to other industries, and we're not in the high range, we're in like the middle to low range.
Thanks for that.
Turn to Director Stone or McGonigal, who were waving at me. It's moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director McGonigal. Could you read the resolutions, please?
That it be recommended to the board that the cannabis in the Cowichan Valley report be received and staff be directed to share the cannabis in the Cowichan Valley report with member municipalities, and the cannabis in the Cowichan Valley report recommendations be considered in the development of the modernized official community plan and comprehensive land use bylaw for electoral areas.
Okay,
Thank you.
don't go away.
Okay.
On the motion, Director Martman.
I'd like to sever 3.
You want to move that? Move that it be severed?
I move to sever, and if I can speak to it, if I get a seconder.
It's seconded. Director Martman?
I think at this point, I would like to actually hear from the farming community on 3 before we actually move it towards the OCP. And I think that's where I'd like to refer 3 to the farming community.
Okay, I've got Director Stone and Manhas. Director Stone, go ahead.
Yeah, the number 3 says that it be considered in the development of the modernized official community plan. My interpretation of that it would be considered with broader priorities around agricultural land uses, et cetera. And I would expect that in the modernized official community plan, there would be engagement with farmers, so referring it to that process would be appropriate.
Director Manhas?
Yeah, ditto to what Director Stone just mentioned. Also, the OCP process is an opportunity where the farmers can actually have their say.
Director Acton?
Well, I guess I'm agreeing. I think there's a lot of unknowns, and it'll give us that opportunity to have those conversations. So I think it's a good idea.
Okay, I need a little clarification here because my understanding is the modernized official community plan, comprehensive use bylaws, there is consultation going on with the agriculture community at this point. So are we delaying unnecessarily when this is going to happen regardless, or is the mover of the motion suggesting there should be something in addition to what's already in play in the process?
So where I stumble over this, and all due respect to the comments, is it says the recommendations be considered, and I think it's that those recommendations is what I want input on from the farming community before we move it towards the OCP. I wish someone from the OCP was here because I think, yeah, it may be semantics, but that's how I read it.
So on process, this isn't our report. This is the craft cannabis producers report, so it's really not our purview to refer somebody else's report out for comments on what's contained in their report. It's our responsibility to refer to our organizations this report if we deem fit. So I'm not trying to split hairs here, but I'm just wondering, I'm looking for help here around the table if the motion is actually in order. So I think at this point, in consideration that it's already underway, I don't necessarily want to rule the motion out of order, but I might suggest that we defeat the motion to sever and we consider with the all 3 items. So with that, Director Stone?
Well, I would say either way, we'll just vote on number 3 separately anyway, but I would support it being passed, but if we want to sever it so that we can vote on that separately. But to me, it's all going to end up in the same place anyway, and that'll be engagement with the agricultural community.
So thank you for that. So what we'll do is we'll vote on the motion to sever. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's defeated. Back to the main motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? One opposed, the motion carries. Before you leave, I want to thank you very much. You are very knowledgeable and your information was very beneficial to us today, and I think the report was great, and I look forward to you working with not only us, but the farming community and our economic development people. With that, I'd like to give you a hand for coming here and helping.
Thank you.
Going to use a little prerogative of the chair, give us 5 minutes, because I think we can go through the further items and get to the end in one run here, so take 5. Can I get you to take your seats and return to the meeting, please? Okay, the first time I was being nice. And they took the gavel away, so please return to your seats. Let's get going. Welcome back, everyone, and you'll hope everybody got fed and watered and all that stuff. And we're going to proceed to R2. And on advice, and I know it's a lot of reading, but Ms. Boyd is going to read the recommendations because they're MFA required. So, Ms. Boyd, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Formerly an employee of MFA, I must read them. Report from the Finance Division, approval of the short-term borrowing for 2023. That it be recommended to the board that short-term borrowing of up to $130,000 be approved for Centennial Park Basketball Court upgrades function 237 Community Parks Area G to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 of the Community Charter. That short-term borrowing of up to $102,185 be approved for the CTV North Watts Road Trailhead Parking Lot and Roadside Trail Connection Project under Function 280 Regional Parks to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 of the Community Charter. That short-term borrowing of up to $200,000 be approved for theater upgrades under Function 426 Cowichan Performing Arts Center to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 of the Community Charter. That short-term borrowing of up to $500,000 be approved for the purchase of a curbside truck under Function 515, curbside garbage and recycling to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 of the Community Charter. That short-term borrowing of up to $217,000 be approved for the purchase of a curbster collection truck under Function 515, curbside garbage and recycling to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement, Section 175 of the Community Charter. That short-term borrowing of up to $400,000 be approved for a trailer chassis under Function 520, solid waste management complex to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement, Section 175 of the Community Charter. That short-term borrowing of up to $1,100,000 be approved for exterior cladding replacement under Function 405 Cowichan Lake Recreation to be paid back over 5 years as per the liabilities under agreement section 175 Community Charter. Thank you.
So understanding these are all approved budgeted items, do we have a mover, seconder? Any discussion on the items? Director Stone?
Just for clarity, my understanding was these approved budget items, both Function 520 is to serve, I believe, at Bings Creek. But also the 515s, aren't those to replace existing assets that were end of life?
I see nodding from our CEO. Does Mr. Postings want to weigh in on that? No, that's correct.
Yeah, and just wanted to be clear that
Yep.
those were the sort of early budget approvals that we provided earlier in the budget process to replace existing assets.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Thank you for, Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. If staff could just quickly speak to number 2, and just I think there might be some confusion in the community about the funding for that project, and just if possible, just outline the total funding that was used for that project and where it came from. Is that possible?
It's not usual because it's really specifically just about the borrowing, but I'm looking for who we have on staff. Ms. Bowen.
Through the chair to Director McClinton, I'd have to look into that because, like as Director Morrison has stated, it's just for the borrowing. Any details behind more information, I'd have to look that up and get back to you on that.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Is that going to this afternoon's board? No, it's not. Okay. Next item, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you. R3, report from the Corporate Services Department, read the Cowichan Housing Association Lakewood Manor Project, Cowichan Lake Elder Care
Mr.
Society.
Chair, before we start, I would like to declare a conflict of interest on number 2, as I'm a director of the Cowichan Lake Elder Care Society, and I'll remove myself.
Then while you're exiting the room, please continue with the resolution reading.
thank you. So, report from the Corporate Services Department. I'll go back to the recommendation. That'd be recommended to the board that the 2023 budget for Function 498 be amended and approved to decrease the Housing Trust Fund by $75,000, increase grant to organization by $75,000, and 2 is that the Lake Cowichan Housing Associations request to disperse $75,000 to Cowichan Lake Elder Care Society for pre-construction costs associated with the Lakewood Manor project be approved.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion on the item? Great, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
So the Cowichan Housing Association ones will go to board for this afternoon. Oh, just the first one? Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Yeah, I think we're now, if we're doing something to the board, we're making a resolution for it. Good. Next item.
Great, thank you. Our 4 report from the Corporate Services Department, Cowichan Housing Association Housing Forum Funding Request. That it be recommended to the board that the 2023 budget for Function 498 be amended and approved to decrease the Housing Trust Fund by $14,500, increase grant to organization $14,500, and 2, that the Cowichan Housing Association's request for $14,500 to host a housing forum in the fall of 2023 be approved.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. R5.
Thank you. Report from the Legislative Services Division regarding the introduction of Accessible BC Act. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board that the terms of reference for the Accessibility Advisory Committee be adopted and that staff be instructed to develop a committee 2024 budget that includes the provisions for A, the cost to developing a CVRD accessibility plan, and B, the cost associated with managing, administering, and supporting the committee.
Anybody want some discussion on this one? Ms. Mohan, please come to the lectern.
Good morning, Board. Through the chair, this report was actually authored by our corporate officer who had car troubles this morning and is unexpectedly delayed. He will be with us this afternoon. So I have reviewed the report and discussed it with him, so I can take questions. I think it's fairly straightforward. At this point, we're a little bit behind on the calendar in terms of our obligations to meet the requirements under the new act. And as a result, he is taking the liberty of crafting draft terms of reference for establishing a committee, and then has outlined sort of what our obligations are on a work plan for getting that committee together, and then creating a work plan for the committee, and then also making sure there's a tool involved that allows feedback to the committee around disability issues in the community or accessibility issues in the community. So I think that the vision is that we get going right away on the establishment of a committee, and that likely the most cost-effective, expedient plan is to find an outside agency to help us with a plan, at least a preliminary plan that we can meet the requirements of the legislation in time, and then give the committee more time to develop that plan over its life. So the other item that's important to note in here is that the staff support for this committee isn't currently budgeted, and is it going to be a challenge going forward? And so I think the recommendation around getting a little more information for the board on what that looks like and what it costs is really important. And so that's where the second aspect of the recommendation comes into play. So.
I think we have some, you were moving, right? I think we have some discussion first to give it. Okay, let's go to Director Stone moving the recommendation, seconded by Director Nicholson. I have a speakers list. Director Stone, please.
Just one minor clerical item on page 3 of the terms of reference in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. Committee members should see themselves as advisors advisory, all one word. I believe it's one or the other. I think it's just advisors, not decision makers. But having gone through the process of developing in terms of reference and enabling a committee municipally, we did review a number of terms of reference and processes that under local governments were undertaking, and this does seem to sort of follow the established best practices. And I just want to say as a comment, this work yields so many results, positive results for community in terms of equity and inclusion that really go above and beyond just those who need accessibility addressed. Some of the projects that we've implemented through the accessibility lens have provided great benefits to the entire community and really pulled people into those spaces that are more healthy and proactive about health. Not just those who need that accessibility or those adaptations. So I invite people to check out what we've done at Transfer Beach Park through our downtown core. Making things more accessible for everyone benefits everyone. Thanks.
Director Acton, Wilson, and myself.
So this is to move towards a regional plan, or would it be just electoral areas? And I'm also wondering, if this has been mandated, how come there's no funds to help us even at this stage?
Ms. Mohan?
So I can't answer with certainty your first question, other than to say that all local governments have this requirement. So as you've heard from Director Stone, each municipality will also have its own plan. So my assumption is that this would be largely EA focused with maybe some regional elements in it for those services that are regional for us. So with respect to resources, absolutely hear you. There are some resources available by the province, but they're information resources, not financial resources. And so I think we're on our own on this one in terms of costs for supporting the work of this committee. So.
Follow up?
So if it's a mandate from the province, where does that mandate come from? And is there a timeline or a, like, does it like supersede our plans in our strategic plan?
Ms. Mohan?
Somewhat, yes. So this legislation was passed in September of 2022, and our obligation is to establish a committee, create the plan, and have a feedback mechanism by September of 2023. That's our obligation. We don't have to implement the plan, but we have to have a plan by September.
You have some information for us, Director
Just on a
Stone?
point of information, there are a number of funding programs to implement, but there is no support for the development of the plans. But there are funding programs through ICBC, Accessibility BC, and other groups to implement recommendations that come from those plans. But yes, it is on, the costs are on the local governments in terms of plan development as per the legislation. And we should be used to it. With the provincial government, it's another download.
Thank you, Director Stone. You have another question, Director Acton?
My question is, are we like interchanging words then? Are we calling electoral areas municipalities and are now we're operating under the same lens? Or so it seems like a huge pressure on, especially with the timeline given, and like lack of funding, and electoral areas don't even have roads that you can ride a bike on, and all of a sudden we're talking about accessibility. It seems like we've kind of jumped far ahead, and it just seems like it actually setting us up for failure, not success.
Through the chair to Director Acton. So I think that my understanding of this is that the committee itself will determine the scope and reach of implementation of any plan. Like they get to set the plan and then they get to implement the plan. And the plan itself, it can be as limited or broad as the committee determines, essentially. So some of the plan elements may be around the built environment. I think that's where people naturally go with their thoughts, is to the built environment. But in fact, there are a lot of sort of administrative policy type improvements that can be made around accessibility as well. So there's discretion. There's discretion on the part of the committee. But in terms of your comments around obligations under the Act, this does apply to all local governments. Yes, it is. As a child of the province has indicated that all local governments, municipalities, and regional districts have to comply with this legislation. So.
Thank you, Ms. Mohan. I've got Director Acton on the list for round 2. Director Wilson, myself, and Martman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Mohan. And I will never, ever get fed up with hearing the term "get used to it." We don't have to get used to it. I'm getting fed up with the province downloading stuff to us and us just rolling over and accepting it. If they want this brought in, and obviously they do, and I have no problem with that at all. And if we are, and to use your term, a child of the province, well, children don't have a lot of money to play with, especially when we have to fund it from our own taxpayers. So pursue as much as we can the funding sources that Director Stone has identified. But to be quite honest, I'm not happy with the way they're doing this. And it's about time we, on the local government, started making this clear to the province that we've had enough of this downloading. Because we're the ones that have to put up with the consequences and deal with our taxpayers. And that's enough. No more. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Stole some of my thunder. Well done. You know, this is, I think, a little lack of insight and vision on behalf of the folks that are downloading this on us. You know, clearly, a lot of work has to be done on accessibility and making our communities, you know, more well-rounded, integrated, all of that. Completely agreed. But, you know, and I'm going to reiterate what I learned at FCM, that, you know, the feds have all the money and the provinces have all the regulations and we have all the problems. And now we're getting another, what seems to me in the reading of the report is it may not cost us a whole bunch of money to get, but it's going to be ongoing and forever. And it probably should be, but to have the dictates without the resources is getting to be very tiresome, and I don't want to get used to it either. So, you know, and just as an example, and I hear Director Acton, and you know, it's such a different world in our local areas. I'm just thinking about a set of stairs that comes down to a park to a crosswalk on highways. Now, it's going to determine where the highway's right-of-way ends as to who's going to be responsible for paying for that. And I just don't think that there's been a significant enough forethought as to the development of the plan, if it's going to apply significantly or primarily to electoral areas, that there's really good thought gone into this. And so I applaud what the municipalities are doing. I'm really having a little difficulty digesting what we're all being asked to eat here. So with that, I'll go to Director Martman next.
Thank you. Good comments. I think when I read this through, I sometimes think accessibility, you know, my wife used a mobility scooter and the difficulties she has, and I think accessibility that way. But when I think elsewise for other community members, one of their problems for accessibilities is actually they don't use computers. So I'm wondering if that type of thing would be incorporated into the thinking. They don't engage that way. That's not how they communicate. That's not how they interact with the CVRD. And so we tend to go everything towards digital these days. So that's one of the things that I would look forward to seeing how that plays out. And then they got people with 1,000-foot driveways and having to pull their garbage to the curb sometime soon. So I'll throw that one in there too. And whether accessibility now becomes, I can't get my garbage to the curb, so how are you going to help me? That's just my comments on it. I did have a point though under removal of members into terms of reference, last page. They're referencing the wrong title for the code of conduct. Okay, thanks.
Round 2, Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All good comments. So I think, you know, if the province mandated this in September, they expected a year, it would take a year. So we're getting it now. So that's an issue right there. We have a really quick report, it's not even on CBRD letterhead. And no judgment to the writer, it's like they're trying to fit it in. And we have essentially a month to produce a committee and direction, and sounds like adopt it by the time we come back after summer break. This is what I'd like to see is staff go back and ask the province for more time. We've seen what happens when we have a plan and we adopt it. Now we're doing all the steps, and this is just way too quick to be able to really have these discussions that were pointed out that are important, really important, and the scope I can see is going to be quite large. And yeah, so for the sake of doing it right and having the proper amount of time, I think we should refer this back to staff to go back to the province and ask for a proper extension. And while they're at it, ask for the funds to facilitate those conversations.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. I've got myself back on the list. Director Nicholson.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with Director Acton on the timeline. It would be worth asking because I don't think that they were thinking about the fact that there was going to be like new boards and, you know, all sorts of ramping up after COVID and all these issues that are making it hard for us to deliver in 1 year. And so I think it would be worth asking. But that said, I think this, I look at this a little bit differently than people. I don't view this as downloading. I view this as doing your business well, best practices. And I think that if we had maybe thought about the issue of accessibility in a more proactive way, we wouldn't be in this position of having to scramble. And but if we do have to scramble, would be very easy to do a phased-in planning kind of a process. So I don't really think it is as big a deal as people are making it out. But I do think the membership of the committee is going to be really important because the members will drive a lot of the kind of issues that we end up looking at. So we should be cognizant of that and make sure that there's, you know, diversity and breadth on that front. Thanks.
Thank you. I kind of got on a roll there when I was speaking last time, and I forgot to ask of staff, and we have both Ms. Bowen and Ms. Mohan in the room. Do we have any estimates as to the initial and ongoing costs? And my big question is, if this hasn't been budgeted for in 2023, where's the money coming from? And do we know if there is a function that will be asked to incorporate this within? And will the 3.5 be applied to their maximum requisition increase? Will they be required to fit this in, and will it come as a supplemental? I see Ms. Miles Wilson running up to the stage here, the lectern.
Through the chair, the way I understand the recommendation in the report is that by passing the recommended resolution, that would be the next piece of information you receive, essentially, is a recommendation for where the work of supporting this committee would fall within the organization in terms of which staff position and or if a new staff position was needed. I suspect a new staff position wouldn't be needed, but if so, then that you would see that in a 2024 supplemental. Should the work of the committee have a cost that goes beyond what is currently budgeted for 2023, that would come with a recommendation for a transfer from operational reserves, essentially, for the balance of 2023 to fund the work. And then, yes, you would see it as a supplemental in 2024. Did you want to add something?
Ouch.
Just for context,
Ms. Miles Wilson?
I just in response to some of the director's comments, I just wanted to kind of calm the nerves a little bit of the requirements of the accessibility plans based on some advice that's online. So this is some guidance. There's been a lot of reviews of the requirements of the Act, and so just a couple of points here, in that an accessibility plan doesn't need to be complete or comprehensive at the start. It's a developing and evolving plan. a couple of other points that the plan will need to be unique to the organization and dependent on the mandate. So there were some concerns about the application of this in the rural and electoral areas. We will need to submit the plans to the province for approval, but they've given a lot of leeway and that this can kind of develop and evolve over time. So I just wanted to make that point, that it doesn't need to be a fully comprehensive and very detailed at the start. It's expected that this thing will develop over time, if that helps.
Thank you, Director Stone, followed by Wilson. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No thunder. That's all over with for the time being. But I've got to make a comment as far as my colleague across the table is concerned. Perhaps this is not big a deal, the cost that's involved here. But that's taking it in isolation. And no, it's not. But once you add up all the other downloading which is going on, it becomes a considerable burden to everybody else. And that's the thing that worries me. And the term that's been used before is a death by 1,000 cuts. And this is one. There's another cut here, there, and some more downloading. Was that thunderous? I don't think so.
Thank you. Have we had the resolution read? I think so. So, Director Acton?
Just a process question. I'm wondering, sounds like this is an electoral area thing, but I'm curious as to why this is a full board vote.
So through the chair to Director Acton, I think that the idea behind the committee is that it addresses all of the services of the regional district. And so given that there are regional services that we provide, those things would involve the full board. So that's why.
I'm tending to agree with Director Acton. Jurisdictionally, we're going to strike a committee that's going to look at our municipal partners' accessibility plans and comment. I'm thinking that's a little offside. So I think it will be specific to electoral areas, except they may have comment on things like regional parks and such. And so there lies the rub. Ms. Miles Wilson, please help us.
And this is Barbara's department, actually. What I was referring to, Mr. Chair, is that we also need to look at our corporate services. So hiring practices, for instance, would be part of it. So fundamentally, it will be looking at the organization and how we consider accessibility and inclusion corporately. So hence, it is really a CVRD, not just electoral areas lens.
Excellent. It'll be a regional function. I like to hear that. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Martman. Any further discussion? I've actually... Ms. Mohan, please.
So there's been discussion around asking for an extension and asking for funding, but there's been no resolution to direct staff to that effect. And so I'm assuming that we're just going to proceed as per the resolution and nothing more.
That's what's on the table.
Okay.
All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Director Acton.
Just a motion to go along with the previous motion, that staff be directed to ask the province for an extension and funding to support this initial phase.
We have a seconder. Does recording staff have a clear understanding of what the resolution is?
I do, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Wow, great work, everybody. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Unfinished business.
None.
New business.
Apparently none.
Thank you. We move into a question period. We have 15 minutes maximum. One question per the items on the agenda, one follow-up question. And if we have time after that, and a little bit of time left, we can ask general questions of the CVRD. Thank you.
I'd like to invite anyone to come to the board to pose a question to the chair.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Kim Bernard from Area B. And my question is for R5, the Accessibility Committee. And I've been hearing as a community volunteer some of the issues in our area, and I'm just wondering how we can contribute to this committee.
It's a good question. At this point, really premature. We haven't established the committee yet. So I would encourage you, when you see maybe perhaps an item on the agenda with a plan as to how to create the committee, and then and the work that they will do, that would be another appropriate question to pose.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions?
No follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Like to invite anyone else that would like to pose a question on the agenda items today to the chair. Going once, going twice, gone. Move to closed under, do you want to read the sections?
Thank you, Chair. We are moving to closed session. Where are we at here? Where are we at? Thank you.
Is there somewhere?
Yeah. Closed session of the Committee of the Whole minutes, June 14th, 2023, and CSR 1, acquisition disposition of land, that's Community Charter Section 91E, as well as the amended agenda item CSNB 1, and that will be closed under Section G, litigation and potential litigation.
We had a motion?